The stranger's hands stopped moving the moment he heard it. "Mama!" The little girl whispered, her voice thin as winter wind. "Are we allowed to eat this, or is it just for looking at?" She was holding a single biscuit like it was made of gold. Josiah Blackwood had seen men die. He'd buried his own daughter with these same hands. But nothing had ever cut him the way those words did. He turned away so the widow wouldn't see his face. Some wounds don't bleed, they just burn. Subscribe now and follow this story to the very end. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The road had been trying to kill him for 3 days straight. Josiah Blackwood kept walking anyway. His horse had gone lame somewhere near the creek bed, and he'd had to leave the animal behind with a prayer and half his water. Now his boots were splitting at the seams, his coat was soaked through, and the snow kept falling like God himself had forgotten to turn it off. "Just keep moving," he muttered to himself. "Moving means living, stopping means dying." He'd learned that lesson the hard way. 6 years of wandering had taught him plenty, but that one stuck the hardest. The wind picked up sharp as a knife against his face. He pulled his collar higher and squinted through the white. Somewhere ahead there had to be shelter. A barn, a cabin, something. His legs were starting to fail him. He could feel it in the way his knees buckled with each step, the way his body wanted to just give up and lie down in that soft, cold blanket of snow. "Not yet," he said through cracked lips. "Not like this." He'd thought about dying plenty of times over the years. When the fever took his wife Sarah. When his little girl Emma stopped breathing in his arms, her small body burning hot even as the life left her. He'd thought about walking into the river and never coming back out. But he hadn't done it. Couldn't do it. Something stubborn in him refused to quit even when quitting seemed like mercy. That stubbornness was the only thing keeping him upright now. The cabin appeared through the snow like a ghost gray wood, sagging roof smoke trailing thin from a crooked chimney. He blinked hard, certain his mind was playing tricks. But no, it was real. His legs moved faster despite the pain. 50 yards, 40, 30. He reached the porch and his knees finally gave out. He caught himself on the railing, gasping, his breath coming out in ragged clouds. The door opened. A woman stood there, thin and hard-faced, with a shotgun aimed straight at his chest. "One more step and I pull this trigger," she said. Her voice didn't shake. Her hands didn't either. Josiah raised his palms slowly. "Ma'am, I ain't here to cause trouble." "That's what the last one said. He tried to steal my chickens." "I don't want your chickens." He coughed, tasting blood. "Just need to get out of this storm. I'll be gone by morning." She studied him with eyes the color of whiskey and firelight, brown with flecks of gold, hard and assessing. Her hair was red-brown, pulled back tight, and her dress was patched in a dozen places. "You armed?" "Pistol on my hip, knife in my boot. I'll give them both to you if it means I can sit by your fire for an hour." Something flickered in her expression. Not trust, she was too smart for that. But maybe recognition of something familiar, the look of a person who'd been beaten down by life and kept getting back up anyway. "Mama." A small voice came from behind her. A boy appeared at her side, maybe 9 years old, with a shock of red hair and a face full of freckles. He was holding a pitchfork that was taller than he was. "Get back inside, Sam," the woman said. "But Mama, he looks sick." "I said get back." The boy retreated, but his eyes stayed fixed on Josiah, curious, wary, calculating, like he was trying to decide if this stranger was a threat or something else entirely. Josiah's legs were shaking now. He couldn't hide it anymore. "Please, ma'am, I got nothing worth taking. Just a tired man trying to survive the night." The woman lowered the shotgun by an inch, just an inch. "What's your name?" "Josiah Blackwood. Folks call me Joe." "Where you from, Josiah Blackwood?" "Everywhere and nowhere. Colorado mostly. Before that, Kansas. Before that, he shook his head. Doesn't much matter anymore. She was silent for a long moment. The snow fell around them thick and relentless. Finally, she stepped aside. You try anything at all, and I will end you. We clear, crystal clear, ma'am. He crossed the threshold, and the warmth hit him like a wall. Not much warmth, truthfully. The fire in the hearth was low burning, what looked like the last of the kindling, but compared to the frozen hell outside, it felt like heaven itself. The cabin was small. One room mostly. A table with 2 chairs. A stove that had seen better decades. A bed in the corner, and a ladder leading up to what must be a sleeping loft. Everything was clean, but worn the kind of poverty that came from bad luck rather than bad living. Sit by the fire, the woman said. Don't touch nothing. He lowered himself onto a stool near the hearth, his joints screaming in protest. His hands were blue at the fingertips. He held them toward the flames, watching the skin slowly remember what warmth felt like. Sam, get the man some water. The boy moved to obey, still watching Josiah with those sharp, suspicious eyes. He handed over a tin cup, and Josiah drank like a man who hadn't tasted water in days because he hadn't. Thank you, son. Sam didn't smile. I ain't your son. Sam. The woman's voice carried a warning. It's all right, Josiah said. Boys got every right to be cautious. Smart even. That seemed to catch Sam off guard. He retreated to his mother's side, uncertain how to respond to a stranger who approved of his distrust. Mama. Another voice, higher, softer. Josiah looked toward the corner and saw her, a little girl, maybe 5 years old, peeking out from behind a blanket that hung from the loft ladder. She had brown hair and enormous eyes that seemed too big for her thin face. His heart seized in his chest. She looked like Emma. Not exactly. Emma had been blonde, had her mother's nose, but something in the way this child held herself, the way she watched the world with quiet wonder and careful fear, made his breath catch. It's all right, Nell, the woman said, her voice softening. Stay up there for now. Is he a bad man? I don't know yet. The honesty of it surprised him. Most mothers would lie, would say, of course not, to comfort their children. But this woman told the truth, even when the truth was uncertain. He respected that. I ain't a bad man, Josiah said quietly. Ain't a good one either, I reckon. Just a man. The woman set her shotgun against the wall within easy reach and moved to the stove. I'm Margaret Colton, Maggie. This is my son Samuel and my daughter Eleanor, Nell. Pleased to meet you all, and I'm sorry for the intrusion. Storm didn't give you much choice. She stirred something in a pot, thin broth, from the smell of it. You eat today? Yesterday, maybe the day before. Hard to keep track. She ladled a small portion into a bowl and set it on the table. That's all I can spare. It's more than I deserve. He moved to the table, slowly making sure his movements were visible, non-threatening. The broth was mostly water with a few sad pieces of potato floating in it, but he ate it like it was the finest meal he'd ever had, because right then it was. You got family, Mr. Blackwood? Maggie asked. She'd taken the chair across from him, her posture rigid, her eyes never leaving his face. Had family. Wife and daughter. They passed 6 years ago. The fever? Yeah. I'm sorry. So am I. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who understood loss without needing to explain it. Sam had moved to the corner, still holding his pitchfork like a tiny soldier. Nell had crept down from the loft and was hiding behind her mother's chair, watching Josiah with those enormous eyes. Your husband? Josiah asked carefully. Maggie's jaw tightened. Thomas. Died 2 winters back. Horse threw him. Broke his neck. She said it flatly, like she'd told the story so many times the words had lost their weight. But her hands gripping her coffee cup told a different story. I'm sorry. Everybody's sorry. Sorry don't bring him back. No, it don't. She looked at him, then really looked. and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. The understanding of people who'd been hollowed out by grief and were still somehow standing. "Mama." Nell tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mama, I'm hungry." "I know, baby. We'll eat supper soon." "But I'm hungry now." "Nell," I said, "it's fine." Maggie stood abruptly, moving to the small cupboard near the stove. She opened it, and Josiah saw the contents: a quarter bag of flour, some salt, a few shriveled potatoes, and a small cloth bundle. She unwrapped the bundle carefully. Inside were 3 biscuits, hard, probably days old, but biscuits nonetheless. She handed one to Nell. The little girl took it with both hands, cradling it like it was precious. She stared at it for a long moment, and then she whispered, "Mama, are we allowed to eat this? Or is it just for looking at—" Josiah's chest cracked open. The words hit him like a bullet clean through, leaving a hole that wouldn't stop bleeding. He'd been hungry before. He'd known want, known desperation, known the gnawing emptiness of a stomach that had given up expecting food. But he'd never heard a child ask permission to eat. Like food was so rare, so precious, that even holding it might be breaking some rule. He turned away, facing the fire, because he couldn't let them see his face. His eyes were burning. "Of course you can eat it, sweetheart." Maggie said, her voice thick. "That's what it's for." "But you said we only eat at supper now, and it ain't supper yet." "I know what I said, but we got a guest and that changes things. Special occasions mean special rules. Eat your biscuit, Nell." The girl took a tiny bite, chewing slowly, savoring it. Sam watched his sister with an expression that was far too old for his 9 years' jealousy and protectiveness warring on his freckled face. Maggie handed him a biscuit too. "Go on, Sam." "But that's the last of them." "I said go on." The boy took it reluctantly, breaking it in half. He handed one half back to his mother. "We share. That's what Pa said. Family shares." Something broke in Maggie's expression just for a second before she pulled it back together. She took the half biscuit and pressed a kiss to her son's red hair. "Your pa was a good man." "I know. You tell me every day." Josiah stood abruptly. His chair scraped against the floor, and all 3 of them turned to look at him. "I need to check on something outside," he said. His voice sounded wrong even to his own ears, too rough, too raw. "Won't be a minute." He didn't wait for permission. He pushed through the door and into the storm, the cold hitting his face like a slap. He made it 10 steps from the porch before his legs gave out. He dropped to his knees in the snow, his hands pressed against his thighs, and he let it come. The grief he'd been holding back for 6 years. The guilt, the shame, the fury at a world that would let children go hungry while asking if they were allowed to eat. "God damn it," he whispered. "God damn this whole broken world." He knelt there until his hands went numb, until his cheeks were wet with tears that froze before they could fall. Then he wiped his face with his sleeve, pushed himself upright, and walked back toward the cabin. He wasn't going to save these people. He knew that. He was a drifter with nothing to offer a broken man held together by stubbornness and spite. But he could do something. Even if it was small, even if it was temporary. He could do something. When he stepped back inside, Maggie was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. "You all right?" "Fine, just needed some air." She didn't believe him. He could see it in her eyes, but she didn't push. "Storm's getting worse," she said instead. "You'll have to stay the night." "I don't want to impose." "It ain't an imposition, it's survival. You go back out there, you die. Simple as that." He nodded slowly. "Then I thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Colton." "Maggie." Mrs. Colton was my mother-in-law, and she was a mean old woman. Despite everything, he felt the corner of his mouth twitch. "Maggie, then." "You can sleep by the fire. I'll get you a blanket." She moved toward the trunk in the corner, but Sam stepped in front of it. "Mama, we only got 3 blankets. If we give him one, Nell will be cold." "I'll share with Nell. But then you'll be cold." "Samuel Joseph Colton." Maggie's voice was firm, but not unkind. "What did your father say about guests?" The boy's jaw tightened. For a moment he looked exactly like his mother. Stubborn, proud, unwilling to yield. But then his shoulders dropped. "A guest in our home is a gift from God," he recited, "even if they don't look like one." "That's right." She pulled a worn quilt from the trunk and handed it to Josiah. Their fingers brushed, and she pulled back quickly like she'd touched a hot stove. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. Blanket's got more holes than wool at this point." Still warmer than snow, she almost smiled. Almost. Nell had finished her biscuit and was watching Josiah with those big eyes again. She crept closer, staying within arm's reach of her mother. "Mister?" "Yes, darlin'. Are you going to stay forever?" "Nell." Maggie's voice carried a warning. "I'm just asking Mama. Lots of people don't stay. The nice man with the cart didn't stay. The lady who brought us beans didn't stay. Nobody ever stays." Josiah crouched down, so he was at eye level with the child. Up close, she looked even thinner, even more fragile. The bones of her wrists were visible beneath her skin. "I ain't gonna be here forever," he said honestly. "But I'll be here for now. That's something, ain't it?" Nell considered this with the gravity only a 5-year-old could muster. "I guess." "Nell, come here." Maggie gathered her daughter into her arms. "It's time for bed." "But the sun ain't even down yet." "I know, baby, but it's cold and bed is warm. Let's get you settled." She carried Nell up the ladder to the loft. Sam followed, though he paused halfway up to look back at Josiah. "If you hurt my mama or my sister," the boy said quietly, "I'll kill you. I know how to use that pitchfork." Josiah met his gaze steadily. "I believe you, son. I ain't your son." "I know, and you're doing right protecting your family. Your pa would be proud." Something shifted in Sam's expression. Surprise, maybe, or longing. Then he climbed the rest of the way up and disappeared into the loft. Josiah settled onto the floor near the fire, pulling the thin quilt around his shoulders. Above him, he could hear Maggie's voice, soft and low, singing something to Nell. A lullaby, maybe, or an old hymn. The words were too faint to make out, but the melody was beautiful, sad and hopeful all at once. He closed his eyes and tried not to think about Sarah singing the same kind of songs to Emma back when the world still made sense. Back when he still had something worth living for. But the memories came anyway, sharp as broken glass. Emma's laugh. Sarah's smile. The way their little cabin in Colorado had smelled like bread and wood smoke and home. He'd lost it all. Not to the fever that had just been the killing blow. He'd been losing it for years before that, piece by piece, every time he rode out for work and stayed gone too long. Every time he chose the job over his family. Every time he told himself there'd be time later, always later. There wasn't. By the time he came home for good, it was too late. Sarah was already sick. Emma was already dying. And all he could do was hold them and watch them go. The fire crackled low and dying. Josiah didn't move to add more wood. There wasn't any to add, he'd seen that much. The Coltons were burning the last of their fuel, and the storm showed no signs of stopping. Tomorrow he'd have to do something about that. Find wood somewhere somehow. Make himself useful before he moved on. Because he would move on. He always did. The staying was the hard part. The staying was what killed you. But tonight he'd stay. He'd keep watch over this broken little family in their broken little cabin, and he'd pray to a God he wasn't sure he believed in anymore that the morning would bring something better. Because right now hope was all any of them had left, and hope, thin as it was, would have to be enough. Above him in the loft, Maggie lay beside her children staring at the ceiling. She could hear the stranger breathing below. Deep, even breaths, the sound of someone who'd found shelter and was grateful for it. She didn't trust him. She couldn't afford to trust anyone, not anymore. Thomas had been the trusting one, the one who saw the good in people even when it wasn't there. That trust had gotten him killed. A man he'd helped on the road had stolen his horse, and the one Thomas chased had spooked and thrown him. No. Trust was a luxury she'd traded in for survival. But something about this man? He'd cried. She'd seen it, even though he'd tried to hide it. When Nell asked about the biscuit, when those terrible words came out of her daughter's innocent mouth, the stranger had broken. Not like a weak man breaks crumbling and useless, but like a strong man breaks clean sharp with edges that could still cut. She recognized that kind of breaking. She'd done it herself plenty of times over the past 2 years. Nell curled against her side, small and warm. Sam lay on her other side, his back rigid even in sleep, still trying to be the man of the house, even in his dreams. "Lord," she whispered into the darkness, "I don't know what you're doing. I don't know why you sent this man to my door. But if he's here to help us, please let me see it. And if he's here to hurt us—" She didn't finish the prayer. She didn't need to. God knew her heart. God knew what she'd do to protect her children. And if Josiah Blackwood turned out to be a threat, God help him. Because she wouldn't. Morning came gray and cold. Josiah woke to the sound of the fire not crackling anymore but dead. Just ash and memory. The cabin had gone frigid overnight, cold enough that his breath hung visible in the air. He rose slowly, joints aching, and looked around. Maggie was already up, standing by the window, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. She was watching the snow fall, her expression unreadable. "Storm's not letting up," she said without turning. "How long it been going?" 3 days before you showed up. 4 now. That's a long storm. We've had worse." But her voice said otherwise. Josiah moved to the hearth and examined the ashes. "You got any wood left?" "Some, not much. There's a few logs in the lean-to out back, but they're probably soaked through. I'll check." She finally turned to look at him. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to. Let me earn my keep, Mrs." He caught himself. "Maggie." Something flickered in her eyes. Not trust, not yet, but something that might grow into it given time. "All right. Sam can show you where." "No need to wake the boy. I'll find it." He pulled on his coat, still damp from yesterday, and stepped outside into the white. The cold hit him like a fist, but he ignored it. He'd worked in worse. He'd survived worse. The lean-to was right where she'd set a crooked little structure attached to the back of the cabin. Inside he found a small pile of logs, wet just as she'd predicted, but not frozen solid. He could work with that. He spent the next hour splitting what he could, bringing the driest pieces inside to thaw near where the fire had been. By the time Sam came down the ladder, rubbing sleep from his eyes, Josiah had coaxed a small flame back to life. "You fixed the fire," Sam said, suspicious. "Tried to anyway. Wood's wet. It won't burn long. We know." The boy's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "We've been rationing." "Smart. It was my idea. Mama wanted to burn it all at once, keep us warm. I said we should make it last." He crossed his arms over his thin chest. "I was right." "You were." "I know." Josiah almost smiled. The kid had spine, he'd give him that. "You hungry, Sam?" The boy's expression flickered just for a second before he pulled it back into that practiced mask of indifference. "We don't eat breakfast no more, just supper. Stretches the food longer." Josiah felt that crack in his chest widen. Just supper. These children ate once a day, and they spoke about it like it was normal. Like it was just the way things were. "That's good thinking," he made himself say. "Your pa teach you that?" "No." Sam's voice hardened. "Pa's dead. I figured it out myself." "Then you're smarter than most men I've met." The boy didn't know how to respond to that. He turned away, busying himself with straightening blankets that didn't need straightening. Maggie came down a few minutes later with Nell in her arms. The little girl was still half asleep, her head on her mother's shoulder, her brown hair tangled from the night. "Fire's going," Maggie said, surprised. For now. Wood's wet, though. Won't last more than a few hours. Better than nothing. They're a town nearby. Somewhere I could get supplies. She set Nell down by the fire, wrapping her in the quilt Josiah had used. Ridge Hollow's about 2 days' walk, but with this storm, I've walked through worse. You'll die. Maybe, maybe not. But you've got 2 children who need to eat, and I ain't doing anyone any good sitting here burning through your wood. Maggie stared at him. Her eyes were sharp, searching, trying to find the lie in his words. Why? She finally asked. Why what? Why do you care? You don't know us. We're nothing to you. Josiah looked at Nell, warming her small hands by the fire. At Sam, standing guard by the window, like a soldier twice his age. At Maggie, thin and exhausted and still somehow standing. I had a daughter, he said quietly. She was about Nell's age when she died. And a wife who used to look at me the way you look at those kids, like nothing in the world mattered more. Maggie's breath caught. I couldn't save them. Couldn't save anybody. But maybe... He shook his head. Maybe I can do something here. Something small. Something that matters. The cabin was silent, except for the pop and hiss of wet wood trying to burn. Then Maggie nodded just once. The storm breaks, you can try for town. But you wait until it's safe. I won't have your death on my conscience. Fair enough. And for the first time since he'd stumbled onto her porch, Josiah Blackwood felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The storm held them prisoner for 2 more days. Josiah learned the rhythms of the cabin in that time, the way the floorboard near the door creaked like an old man's bones, the way the wind found every gap in the walls and whistled through like it was searching for something. He learned that Sam woke before dawn and checked the windows for threats before anyone else stirred. He learned that Nell talked to her rag doll in whispers, telling it stories about a father who would come back someday. He learned that Maggie never truly slept. On the second morning, he caught her at the window again, her silhouette sharp against the gray light. She hadn't moved in what felt like hours. You keep watching like that, you'll wear a hole in the glass, he said quietly. She didn't turn. Last winter, 3 men came through, said they were looking for work. Thomas was already gone by then. Her voice was flat empty. They took what little we had. Would have taken more if I hadn't. She stopped. Hadn't what? Shot one of them. Josiah moved to stand beside her, keeping a respectful distance. He'd die? No, but he bled enough to convince the others to leave. She finally looked at him, and her eyes were hard as river stone. I ain't proud of it, but I ain't sorry either. Shouldn't be sorry. You protected your children. That's what Thomas would have said. Then Thomas was a smart man. She almost smiled. Almost. He was a fool, actually. Trusting fool who believed everyone deserved a second chance. Her jaw tightened. That's what got him killed. How so? She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped to barely a whisper. Man came through here maybe a month before Thomas died. Said his horse had gone lame, needed help. Thomas gave him food, shelter, even fixed his saddle. She shook her head slowly. Week later, that same man came back with 2 others. Stole our best horse in the night. Thomas went after them. And the horse threw him. The horse they stole spooked when Thomas caught up. Threw him into a ravine. Broke his neck on the rocks. Her hands were trembling now, though her voice stayed steady. They found him 3 days later. Frozen solid. Josiah didn't know what to say. There were no words for that kind of loss. No comfort that wouldn't sound hollow. So he said the only true thing he could. I'm sorry, Maggie. Truly. I know you are. She turned back to the window. That's why I ain't shot you yet. He let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Appreciate that. Don't thank me too quick. Day's still young. This time she did smile. Just a flicker there and gone, but real. It was the first time he'd seen her smile since he arrived. The children woke slowly, emerging from the loft like small, cautious animals. Nell came first, climbing down the ladder with her rag doll clutched under one arm. She'd taken to following Josiah around the cabin, watching everything he did with those enormous eyes. "Mr. Joe..." He'd given up correcting her. "Yes, darlin'. Are you gonna fix the fence today? If the storm lets up, maybe." "Sam says the fence is too broke to fix. He says we'd need new wood and we ain't got none." "Sam's probably right, but sometimes you can make do with what you have." She considered this with the seriousness of a judge weighing evidence. "Mama says that too. She says we gotta make do 'cause ain't nobody coming to help us." The words hit him harder than they should have. He crouched down to her level the way he'd done with Emma all those years ago. "Your mama's a smart woman, but sometimes help shows up when you least expect it. Like you? Maybe? We'll see. I hope your help." She hugged her doll tighter. "We ain't had help in a real long time." Before he could respond, Sam came down the ladder, his red hair sticking up in every direction. He looked at Josiah, then at his sister, and his expression hardened. "Nell, come eat." "But I was talking to..." "I said come eat." The little girl obeyed, casting one last look at Josiah before scurrying to her brother's side. Sam put a protective arm around her shoulder and guided her toward the table where Maggie was portioning out the last of the dried beans. Josiah watched them go, something twisting in his chest. Sam didn't trust him. That was clear enough. And the boy was right not to trust was dangerous out here, especially for a family that had already been burned by it once. But there was something else in Sam's eyes too. Something that looked almost like jealousy. "He's afraid," Josiah realized. "Afraid I'm going to take his place." The thought made him ache. 9 years old, and the boy had already made himself responsible for everything. For his mother, for his sister, for a farm that was falling apart around them. No child should carry that weight. "Mr. Blackwood." Maggie's voice cut through his thoughts. "You planning to eat or just stand there looking mournful?" He moved to the table and took his seat. The portion in front of him was smaller than the others, he noticed, even if she thought he wouldn't. "This ain't right," he said quietly. "What ain't?" "You giving me less. I can see it, Maggie. I ain't blind. You're a guest. Guests get what we can spare. And if what you can spare means your children go hungry..." Her eyes flashed. "My children are fine." "They ain't fine. Look at them." He kept his voice low, too low for Sam and Nell to hear. "Nell's dress is hanging off her. Sam's got shadows under his eyes, dark as bruises. They're starving, Maggie. We all are." "You think I don't know that?" Her whisper was fierce, furious. "You think I don't lie awake every night counting the days until we run out of food? I know exactly how bad it is. I've known since October." "Then let me help." "How you gonna make food appear out of thin air?" "No. But I can hunt, I can trap. And when this storm breaks, I can get to town and bring back supplies." "With what money?" He reached into his coat and pulled out the small leather pouch he'd been carrying. Inside were a few coins, not much but something. And beneath them a gold ring. Sarah's wedding ring. He'd kept it for 6 years, carrying it everywhere, unable to let go. It was the last piece of her he had left. He set it on the table. "With this." Maggie stared at the ring, then at him. "I can't take that." "You ain't taking it. I'm giving it. It's your wife's ring. Was. She's gone. And she'd..." His voice cracked. He swallowed hard and tried again. "She'd wanted to feed hungry children. That's the kind of woman she was." "Josiah, don't." He pushed the ring toward her. "Don't make this harder than it already is. Just take it, please." She was silent for a long, terrible moment. He could see the war in her eyes, pride against practicality, dignity against desperation. Finally, slowly, she reached out and picked up the ring. "I'll pay you back." "No, you won't." "I will, somehow." "Maggie." He waited until she met his eyes. You already have. She didn't ask what he meant. Maybe she understood. Maybe she didn't want to. Either way, she slipped the ring into her pocket and turned back to her children. Eat up, she told them. We got work to do. The storm broke on the third day. Josiah woke to silence, not the howling, pressing silence of wind and snow, but the soft, empty silence of a world that had finally stopped fighting. He sat up slowly, his back aching from nights on the hard floor. Through the window, he could see the first light of dawn creeping over the horizon. The sky was pale blue, almost white, and the snow lay thick and undisturbed as far as the eye could see. It's over, Maggie said. She was standing by the door, already dressed, her coat pulled tight. She looked exhausted, they all did, but there was something else in her face now. Something that might have been hope. Looks like it, Josiah agreed. I should head out while the weather holds. The trail to town will be buried. I'll find it. And if you don't... He stood, stretching the stiffness from his limbs. Then I'll make my own trail. She studied him for a long moment. You really gonna come back? I said I would. Lots of men say lots of things. I ain't lots of men. Something flickered in her expression, doubt maybe, or the ghost of trust trying to find purchase. No, she said quietly. I reckon you ain't. He gathered what little he had, his coat, his hat, his empty pack. At the door, he paused. Sam, he called. The boy appeared at the top of the ladder, his face wary. What? Come here a minute. Sam climbed down slowly, every movement broadcasting suspicion. He stopped a few feet away, arms crossed, chin lifted. I need you to do something for me, Josiah said. I don't take orders from you. It ain't an order, it's a request. The boy's eyes narrowed. What kind of request? Josiah crouched down so they were eye to eye. While I'm gone, you're the man of the house. That means you look after your mama and your sister. You keep the fire going, keep the doors barred at night, and don't let anyone in you don't know. Can you do that? Sam's jaw worked. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to argue, to tell Josiah that he'd been doing exactly that for 2 years without any stranger's help. But something in Josiah's tone must have reached him, because instead, he just nodded. Yeah, I can do that. Good man. Josiah held out his hand. Sam looked at it like it might bite him. Then slowly, he reached out and shook it. His grip was firm for a boy his age, determined. You better come back, Sam said quietly. Nell's already talking about you like you're some kind of hero. If you don't come back, I'm the one who's gonna have to explain it to her. I'll come back. Promise. Josiah hesitated. He'd made promises before. To Sarah, to Emma, to himself. He'd broken every single one. But looking at this boy, this fierce, frightened, stubborn boy who was trying so hard to be a man, he found he couldn't lie. I promise. Sam held his gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded and stepped back. All right then. I'll hold you to it. Nell came flying down from the loft, her rag doll forgotten on the bed above. She ran straight to Josiah and wrapped her arms around his leg. Don't go, she said, her voice muffled against his coat. Please don't go. He knelt down and gently untangled her arms. I have to, sweetheart, but I'll be back before you know it. What if you get lost? I won't get lost. What if the bad men find you? He glanced at Maggie, who had gone pale. What bad men? Nell, Maggie said sharply. That's enough. But Mama, you said... I said that's enough. Josiah stood slowly. Maggie, what bad men? She didn't answer right away. Her hands had gone to the pockets of her coat, and he could see them trembling slightly. There's been talk, she finally said. In town before the storm. About a group of men working their way through the territory. They've been hitting farms, taking what they want. She paused. Killing anyone who fights back. And you didn't think to mention this? What good would it have done? You were already stuck here. No point adding to the worry. How many men? 4, maybe 5. Led by someone named Garrett. Big man, mean eyes. The deputy warned me about him last month. Josiah felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd heard the name Garrett before back in Colorado. Mean didn't begin to cover it. He give you any advice, the deputy? Keep my head down. Don't draw attention. She laughed bitterly. Hard to do when you're a widow with 2 children and no help. You got help now? She looked at him, then really looked, and something shifted between them. Not trust, not yet, but the possibility of it. The first fragile thread. Just come back, she said softly. That's all I ask. He nodded once. I will. Then he opened the door and stepped out into the white. The cold hit him like a wall, sharp and absolute. The snow was deep, nearly to his knees in places, but the sky was clear and the wind had died to nothing. Good traveling weather if he moved fast. He made it to the edge of the property before he heard footsteps crunching behind him. He turned expecting Sam. Instead, he found Maggie, her breath fogging in the frigid air. Forgot something, she said. She held out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. He took it carefully, feeling the weight. What is this? Biscuits. I saved a bit of flour back. Made them this morning while you were sleeping. Maggie, you can't. I can and I am. Her voice was firm. You're no good to us if you starve on the road. He looked at the bundle in his hands, then at her face. Thin, tired, beautiful, in the way strong things are beautiful. Thank you. Don't thank me, just... She stopped, her voice catching. Just be careful, please. I will. She nodded once and turned back toward the cabin. But at the door, she paused and looked over her shoulder. Josiah. Yeah. When you come back. She hesitated. When you come back, maybe you could stay a while. Help with the spring planting, if you wanted. His chest tightened. I'd like that. She almost smiled. Then she was gone, the door closing behind her with a soft thud. Josiah stood there for a long moment, the cold wind biting at his face, the bundle of biscuits warm in his hands. Then he turned and started walking. The road to Ridge Hollow was buried under 3 feet of snow, but he found it anyway, or found something close to it. He followed the faint impression of fence posts, the occasional glimpse of a marker stone, the instinct that had kept him alive through 6 years of wandering. He walked until his legs burned and his lungs ached. He walked until the sun climbed high, and then began its slow descent. He walked until the shadows grew long, and the cold deepened from uncomfortable to dangerous. By nightfall, he'd covered maybe 10 miles. Not fast enough. At this rate, he'd be 3 days getting to town, and 3 more getting back. That was too long. Far too long. He found shelter in the shell of an old barn, its roof half collapsed, but its walls still standing. He built a small fire from dead branches and ate one of Maggie's biscuits, savoring every bite. It tasted like hope, like home. He thought of Nell's face as he'd left, the fear, the confusion, the desperate plea for him to stay. He thought of Sam's grudging handshake, the weight of responsibility in those young eyes. He thought of Maggie standing in the doorway, her voice soft for the first time since he'd met her. Maybe you could stay a while. He'd been running for so long. From the graves in Colorado. From the guilt that never faded. From the man he'd been and the man he'd failed to become. But sitting here now in this broken barn in the middle of nowhere, he realized something. He didn't want to run anymore. He wanted to go back. The second day was harder. The snow had drifted overnight, filling in the path he'd made and creating new obstacles at every turn. His boots were soaked through his feet, numb, his hands clumsy inside gloves that had frozen stiff. But he kept moving. He had to keep moving. By midday he crested a hill and saw it. Ridge Hollow, a cluster of buildings huddled together against the white. Smoke rose from chimneys. Horses stood tied outside the general store. Civilization. He pushed forward, his pace quickening despite his exhaustion. The town was small, maybe a dozen buildings all told, but right now it looked like paradise. He made it to the main street and paused to catch his breath. A few people glanced his way, curious, suspicious, but no one approached. That was fine. He didn't need friends. He needed supplies. The general store was warm inside, almost uncomfortably so. A pot-bellied stove glowed in the corner, and the air smelled of tobacco and leather and something sweet, molasses maybe. The man behind the counter looked up. He was old, with a white beard and eyes that had seen too much. "Help you. Need supplies. Flour, salt, coffee if you got it. Dried meat. Whatever you can spare." The old man studied him. "You got money." Josiah pulled out the gold ring and set it on the counter. The old man's eyebrows rose. "That's a wedding band." "Was. You sure you want to part with it?" "I'm sure." The old man picked up the ring, turning it in his gnarled fingers. "This'll buy you plenty. More than you can carry alone. I'll manage." "Where you headed?" "Back north. Colton Place." Something flickered in the old man's expression. "The widow. You know her. Knew her husband. Good man. Shame what happened to him." He set the ring down. "She's still holding on out there, barely. That woman's got grit, I'll give her that. Most folks would have given up by now." "She ain't most folks." The old man smiled slightly. "No, I reckon she ain't." He turned and began pulling items from the shelves. "I'll give you a fair price. More than fair. Any friend of Margaret Colton's is a friend of mine." "I appreciate that." "Don't appreciate me yet." The old man's voice dropped. "You hear about the trouble." "What trouble?" "Group of men been working their way through the territory. Hitting farms, taking what they want. Killed a family over near Willow Creek last week." Josiah's jaw tightened. "I heard something about that. Man named Garrett." "That's the one. Big fellow, face like a thundercloud. Got 4 or 5 men with him, all of them mean as snakes." The old man leaned closer. "Word is, they're headed this direction, looking for easy pickings. The widow's place is isolated. Exactly why you should be worried." The old man began packing the supplies into a large canvas sack. "You're going back there alone?" "Yes." "You any good with that pistol on your hip?" "Good enough." "Hope so. For her sake." The old man pushed the sack across the counter. "That's everything I can give you. Should last a few weeks if you're careful." Josiah hefted the sack onto his shoulder. It was heavier than he'd expected, but he'd carry it if it killed him. "Thank you. Truly." "Don't thank me. Just keep that woman and her children safe." The old man's eyes were hard. "Lord knows they've suffered enough." Josiah nodded once and turned toward the door. "One more thing," the old man called. He paused. "What?" "The deputy's been looking for you. Said he saw you a few days back heading toward the widow's place. He wants to talk." "About what?" "Didn't say. But if I were you, I'd find him before he finds you. Man like that don't like being avoided." Josiah considered this. He didn't have time for deputies and questions. Every hour he spent here was an hour Maggie and her children were alone. But avoiding the law had never worked out well for anyone. "Where can I find him?" "Saloon, probably. That's where he spends most of his time these days." "Thanks." He pushed through the door and back into the cold. The saloon was easy to find. It was the only building with music coming from inside, thin and tinny piano notes drifting through the walls. Josiah tied his sack to the post outside and pushed through the swinging doors. The deputy was sitting alone at a corner table, a glass of whiskey in front of him. He looked up as Josiah entered, and his eyes narrowed. "Josiah Blackwood." "Deputy." "Heard you were back in town?" The deputy gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." Josiah sat. The deputy studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You staying at the widow's place?" "Was. Storm caught me there." "And now?" "Heading back. Got supplies." "That's charitable of you." She needs help. She needs more than help. The deputy leaned forward. She needs protection. That place is a sitting duck for anyone with bad intentions. I know. That's why I'm going back. The deputy's eyes searched his face. You ain't got no stake in this. No family, no ties. Why do you care? Josiah thought about the question. Thought about Nell's voice asking if she was allowed to eat. Thought about Sam's fierce, frightened eyes. Thought about Maggie standing at the window watching for threats that never stopped coming. Because someone should, he said finally. The deputy was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. All right, I believe you. He reached into his coat and pulled out a worn leather pouch. Take this. What is it? Ammunition. You're gonna need it. Josiah took the pouch, feeling its weight. Why are you helping me? Because I can't help her. The deputy's voice was bitter. I got a whole territory to cover and 24 families that need protection. I can't be everywhere. He drained his whiskey in one gulp. But you can be somewhere. You can be there. I intend to. Then go. The deputy stood. And Blackwood, if Garrett shows up at that farm, don't try to be a hero. Just get them out. Get them somewhere safe. And if I can't... The deputy's expression hardened. Then make sure he don't walk away either. Josiah nodded once and stood. He had a long walk ahead of him. And something told him he wasn't going to make it back in time. He pushed himself harder than he'd ever pushed before. The snow fought him every step, dragging at his boots, pulling at the heavy sack on his back. His legs screamed for rest. His lungs burned with each frozen breath. But every time he thought about stopping, he saw Nell's face, heard Sam's voice. You better come back. He kept moving. The first night, he barely slept. He found a hollow beneath an overhang of rock and huddled there, shivering, too cold to build a fire. The deputy's ammunition pouch pressed against his chest, a constant reminder of what might be waiting at the end of this road. By dawn, he was moving again. The second day blurred into the third. Time lost meaning. There was only the next step, and the next, and the next after that. The sack grew heavier with each mile, the straps cutting into his shoulders until he couldn't feel them anymore. On the afternoon of the third day, he crested the final ridge and saw the cabin below. Smoke rose from the chimney. The door was closed, no signs of disturbance. He let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. They were safe. For now. He half ran, half stumbled down the slope, the snow giving way beneath his boots. By the time he reached the porch, his heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The door flew open before he could knock. Maggie stood there, shotgun raised, her face pale and fierce. Then she saw him, and something crumbled in her expression. You came back. I said I would. She lowered the gun slowly, her hands trembling. I thought when the third day passed, I thought maybe... I know. He dropped the sack on the porch, too exhausted to carry it another step. I know what you thought, but I'm here. Josiah. Her voice broke on his name. Josiah, there's been... Mama. Nell came flying out the door and threw herself at his legs just like before. But this time, something was different. She was shaking her small body, trembling against him. Mr. Joe, I was so scared. There were men, bad men. They came yesterday and Sam... Nell, hush. Maggie's voice was sharp. Too sharp. Josiah looked at her. Really looked. And he saw it, the bruise on her cheekbone half hidden by her hair. The way she held her left arm close to her body. The fear in her eyes that hadn't been there before. What happened? Nothing. It was nothing. Maggie. I handled it. Where's Sam? She didn't answer. Her jaw tightened and she looked away. Maggie, where is your son? The silence stretched between them, heavy and terrible. Then a small voice came from inside the cabin. I'm here. Josiah pushed past Maggie into the house. Sam sat at the table, his face swollen and bruised, one eye nearly shut. His lip was split, dried blood crusted at the corner of his mouth. The boy looked up at him with his one good eye. "I tried to stop them," he said quietly. "I tried." Josiah felt something cold and dark settle into his chest. He crossed to the table and knelt beside the boy, examining his injuries with gentle hands. "How many?" "3. Maybe 4. Sam's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. "They came yesterday morning, said they wanted food. Mama told them we didn't have any. They didn't believe her. So they hit you. I threw a rock at one of them. The big one." A ghost of pride flickered across Sam's battered face. "Got him good too, right in the eye." "Sam," Maggie's voice was anguished. "I told you not to. He was hurting you, Mama. He was hurting you, and I couldn't just stand there." Josiah's hands had curled into fists. He forced them to relax, forced his voice to stay calm. "The big one. He have a scar. Here." He traced a line down his own cheek. Sam nodded slowly. "You know him?" "I know of him. Name's Garrett." Maggie made a small sound. "That's what the deputy said. That's who he warned us about." "Where did they go after they—" Josiah couldn't finish the sentence. The rage building in his chest made it hard to speak. "North," Sam said. "Toward the old Miller place. The tall one said something about waiting there until the weather cleared." "How far?" "Maybe 5 miles, maybe less." Josiah stood. His exhaustion had vanished, replaced by something else. Something hot and sharp and dangerous. "Stay here. Keep the doors locked." "Josiah, no." Maggie grabbed his arm. "You can't go after them alone. There's too many." "I ain't going after them. Not yet." He met her eyes. "But I need to know where they are. I need to know if they're coming back." "They said they would." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They said they'd be back when they were done at the Miller place. Said they wanted—" She stopped, her face going pale. "Said they wanted what?" "Me." The word came out broken. "They said they wanted me." The cold, dark thing in Josiah's chest turned to ice. He looked at this woman, this fierce, stubborn, beautiful woman who had survived everything the world had thrown at her, who had buried her husband and kept her children alive through sheer force of will, who had opened her door to a stranger and given him shelter when she had nothing left to give. He looked at her and he made a decision. "They ain't gonna touch you," he said quietly. "Not ever. I swear it." "You can't promise that." "I just did." She stared at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Why? Why do you care so much? You could leave. You could take your supplies and go, and no one would blame you." "I'd blame me." "Josiah. I lost my family once." His voice cracked, but he kept going. "I wasn't there when they needed me. I was off chasing money, chasing work, chasing some fool idea of what a man was supposed to be. And when I finally came home, they were already gone." He reached out and touched her face, his thumb brushing gently over the bruise on her cheek. "I ain't gonna make that mistake again. Not with you, not with your children." A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't brush it away. "You barely know us." "I know enough." They stood there for a long moment, inches apart, the air between them charged with something neither of them could name. Then Nell's voice broke the silence. "Mama, is Mr. Joe gonna stay now?" Maggie pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I don't know, baby. That's up to him." Josiah looked at the little girl, at her enormous eyes and her trembling lip, and the rag doll clutched against her chest. "Yeah," he said softly. "I'm gonna stay." Nell's face lit up like the sun breaking through clouds. She ran to him and hugged his legs again, and this time he didn't hesitate to put his hand on her hair. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew you'd come back. Told you I would, didn't I?" "Yeah, but lots of people say things they don't mean. You actually meant it." The simplicity of her faith broke something inside him, something that had been broken for a long time. He looked up at Sam, still sitting at the table, his battered face unreadable. "What about you?" Josiah asked. "You want me to stay?" The boy was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "You came back. That's more than most would do." He paused. "And you brought food." Despite everything, Josiah almost smiled. "That I did." He crossed to the porch and retrieved the heavy sack, carrying it inside and setting it on the table. When he opened it, Nell gasped. "Flour," Josiah said, pulling out the items one by one. "Salt, coffee, dried beef, beans, some sugar, not much, but some. And—" He reached into the bottom of the sack and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. "What's that?" Nell asked, bouncing on her toes. "Something special." He handed it to her. "Go on, open it." She unwrapped it carefully, her small fingers fumbling with the paper. Inside was a peppermint stick, red and white striped, gleaming in the lamplight. Nell stared at it like she'd never seen anything so beautiful in her life. "For me? For you? But I didn't do nothing to earn it." Josiah crouched down so he was at her level. "You don't got to earn everything, sweetheart. Sometimes good things just happen, because you deserve them." She looked at the candy, then at him, her eyes filling with tears. "Thank you, Mr. Joe." "You're welcome, darlin'." She ran to show her mother the peppermint stick clutched in her hands like a treasure. Maggie looked at Josiah over her daughter's head, and in her eyes he saw something he hadn't seen before. Hope. Real, fragile, terrifying hope. He turned away before she could see how much it affected him. "Sam, you eat yet today?" "No, sir." "Then let's fix that." He spent the next hour cooking. It had been years since he'd made a real meal, but his hands remembered the motions, kneading dough, stirring beans, slicing dried beef into thin strips. Maggie tried to help, but he waved her off. "You're hurt. Rest." "I ain't an invalid." "Never said you were, but you're hurt and resting ain't weakness. Sit down." She sat, though her jaw was tight with protest. Sam watched from the corner, his one good eye tracking Josiah's every movement. "You know how to cook," the boy said finally. "My mama taught me. Said a man who couldn't feed himself was only half a man." "My pa couldn't cook worth nothing. Burned water, Mama used to say." "Every man's got his strengths." Josiah glanced at the boy. "Your pa's was other things, I reckon." "He was good with animals. Could calm a spooked horse in 10 seconds flat." Sam's voice softened. "And he told the best stories. Used to make up adventures for me and Nell. Dragons and knights and all that." "That's a good skill. Important." "You think so? I know so. Stories are how we make sense of the world. How we remember who we are when everything else is falling apart." Sam was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You got any stories, Mr. Blackwood?" Josiah stirred the beans slowly. "Got a few. Mostly sad ones, though." "Sad ones are okay. Mama says sad stories help us feel less alone in our sadness." "Your mama's a wise woman." "I know." Sam paused. "She likes you." Josiah's hand stilled on the spoon. "What makes you say that?" "She don't let people help her, ever. Says accepting help is the same as admitting defeat." The boy's voice was matter-of-fact. "But she let you help. That means something." Josiah didn't know how to respond to that. So he just nodded and went back to stirring. When the food was ready, they ate together at the small table, the four of them crowded close, passing bread and beans and strips of beef that tasted better than anything Josiah had eaten in years. Nell chattered about her peppermint stick, saving it for later, wanting to make it last as long as possible. Sam ate steadily, his injured face, making chewing difficult, but his appetite undimmed. And Maggie. Maggie watched them all with an expression Josiah couldn't quite read. Grateful, maybe. Or afraid. Or both. After supper, she put the children to bed, climbing up to the loft with them and staying longer than usual. Josiah cleaned the dishes, listening to the soft murmur of her voice above the gentle rhythm of a lullaby he almost recognized. When she came back down, her eyes were red. "They're asleep," she said. "Good. They need it." She moved to the window, looking out at the darkness beyond. "They'll come back. Garrett and his men. You know that." "I know. What are we going to do?" Josiah dried his hands on a rag and crossed to stand beside her. "We got options. We could run, pack up what we can carry and head for town. And leave everything, the farm, the land, Thomas's grave." She shook her head. "I can't. This is all I have left of him." "Then we stay, and we fight. Against 4 men, 5 with 1 pistol and a shotgun. I've been outnumbered before. And you won." He was quiet for a moment. "Not always, but I survived." She turned to look at him, her face half lit by the dying fire. "That ain't exactly reassuring." "I know, but it's honest." He met her eyes. "I ain't gonna lie to you, Maggie. I ain't gonna promise everything will be fine when I don't know if it will. But I will tell you this. I will do everything in my power to protect you and your children, even if it kills me. I don't want you to die. I don't particularly want to die either, but some things are worth the risk." She was silent for a long moment. Then she reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were cold, rough with calluses, strong despite their slenderness. He held them gently like something precious. "My husband used to say that God puts people in our path for a reason," she said softly. "I stopped believing that after he died. Stopped believing in much of anything, truth be told. And now," she looked at their joined hands, "now I'm not so sure. Maybe some things happen for a reason after all. You think God sent me here?" "I think something did." She squeezed his fingers. "I don't know what to call it, but I'm grateful for it." He wanted to say something, wanted to tell her that he felt the same way, that meeting her had changed something inside him, that for the first time in 6 years, he felt like maybe there was a reason to keep living. But the words stuck in his throat, too big and too raw to speak aloud. So instead, he just squeezed her hand back. They stood there for a long time side by side at the window, watching the darkness outside and holding on to each other like survivors of a shipwreck, clinging to the same piece of driftwood. Josiah woke in the gray light of early dawn, his body stiff from another night on the hard floor. But something was different. Something had changed. He lay still, listening. Hoofbeats. Faint at first, but growing louder. Coming from the north. He was on his feet in an instant, pistol in hand. "Maggie." She was already awake, already moving. She grabbed the shotgun from its place by the door and positioned herself at the window. "How many?" she asked, her voice steady. "Can't tell yet. Stay here." "Like hell." "Maggie, this is my home. I ain't hiding in the corner while you fight for it." He wanted to argue, but there was no time. The hoofbeats were close now, maybe 100 yards out. "Fine, but keep the children quiet, no matter what happens." She nodded once and moved toward the ladder. Sam, wake up. Take your sister and stay in the loft. Don't come down no matter what you hear." "But Mama," "Do as I say." There was a scramble of movement above, then silence. Josiah moved to the door and cracked it open, peering out into the dawn. 4 riders emerged from the tree line, their horses dark against the snow. They moved slowly, deliberately, like predators who knew their prey had nowhere to run. The man in front was huge, tall, and broad, with shoulders like a bull and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. A fresh wound marked his left eye, swollen and angry. Sam's rock, Josiah thought. Good boy. The riders stopped about 50 yards from the cabin. The big man, Garrett, swung down from his horse and walked forward a few steps, his boots crunching in the snow. "Morning!" he called out, his voice carrying in the still air. "We're back, just like we promised." Josiah didn't respond. He watched, waiting, his finger light on the trigger. "I know you're in there, widow woman, you and your brats." Garrett smiled, and it was the ugliest thing Josiah had ever seen. "Come on out. We got unfinished business." Still nothing. Garrett's smile faded. "I ain't a patient man. You got 10 seconds to open that door, or we're gonna open it for you. And trust me, you don't want that." Josiah looked at Maggie. She was pale, her knuckles white on the shotgun, but her hands were steady. "Stay behind me," he murmured. "Whatever happens." Then he opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. Garrett stopped mid-stride, surprise flickering across his brutal face. "Well, well, the widow's got herself a man." "I ain't her man." Josiah's voice was calm, flat. "I'm just someone passing through." "Passing through, huh?" Garrett's eyes narrowed. "Funny. I don't recall seeing you here before. Storm caught me. I stayed to wait it out. Storm's been over for days. What's your excuse now?" Josiah didn't answer. He stood perfectly still, his hand hanging loose at his side, inches from his pistol. Garrett studied him for a long moment. Then he laughed a harsh, ugly sound. "You're a brave man, I'll give you that. Stupid, but brave." He gestured to his men. "There's 4 of us, and 1 of you. How you figure this is gonna go?" "Reckon 1 of us is gonna die today. Maybe more than 1. "You willing to die for a woman you don't even know?" Josiah thought of Nell's face lit up with joy at a peppermint stick, of Sam's battered pride, his fierce determination to protect his family, of Maggie's hand in his, cold and strong and trusting. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I am." Something shifted in Garrett's expression. Not fear, men like him didn't feel fear, but wariness maybe. The recognition that he was dealing with someone who had nothing left to lose. "Last chance," Garrett said. "Walk away, leave the woman and the children, and you can ride out of here alive." "And if I don't," Garrett's hand moved toward his gun, "then you won't be walking anywhere." The silence stretched between them, thin and sharp as a blade. Then Josiah smiled. "You ever killed a man who wanted to die?" he asked quietly. "Because I have to tell you, we're the most dangerous kind." Garrett's eyes flickered, just for a second, but it was enough. In that moment of hesitation, Josiah made his move. His pistol cleared leather before Garrett's hand reached his holster. The first shot caught the big man in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. Garrett roared like a wounded bear and stumbled, his gun finally free, but his aim wild. The bullet whipped past Josiah's ear close enough to feel the heat. Josiah was already moving. He threw himself to the side as the other 3 men opened fire, their shots splintering the porch railing where he'd stood a heartbeat before. He hit the ground hard, rolled, and came up shooting. The second man went down with a bullet in his chest. The third, a thin, weasel-faced man with rotted teeth, ducked behind his horse, using the animal as cover. "Kill him!" Garrett screamed, clutching his shoulder. "Kill him now!" The fourth man had circled around, trying to flank the cabin. Josiah saw him too late. The man had a clear shot. His rifle raised, his finger tightening on the trigger. Then the cabin door flew open, and Maggie's shotgun roared. The flanking man spun and fell, his rifle discharging harmlessly into the snow. He didn't get up. "Get inside!" Josiah shouted. "Not a chance!" She was reloading, her hands steady despite the chaos. He'd never seen anything more beautiful or more terrifying in his life. Garrett had recovered enough to raise his weapon. Blood soaked his coat, but his eyes burned with fury. "You're dead," he snarled. "Both of you, dead." He fired. The bullet caught Josiah in the side, a white-hot lance of pain that stole his breath. He staggered, but didn't fall. Couldn't fall. If he went down now, they were all dead. He raised his pistol and squeezed the trigger. Click. Empty. Garrett's bloody face split into a grin. "Out of bullets, hero!" Josiah reached for the ammunition pouch the deputy had given him, but his fingers were clumsy, slick with blood. The pouch slipped from his grasp and fell into the snow. Garrett took a step forward, then another. His gun was aimed at Josiah's head, steady, despite his wounds. "Any last words?" Josiah looked at him. This monster, this destroyer of families, and felt something strange settle over him. Not fear, not regret. Peace. He'd done what he could. He'd tried. And if this was where it ended, at least he'd die standing up. At least he'd die fighting for something that mattered. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Duck." Garrett's brow furrowed in confusion. Then Sam's pitchfork took him in the back. The boy had crept out the side window while everyone was focused on the gunfight. He'd crossed the distance in silence, his bare feet soundless in the snow, and he'd struck with every ounce of strength in his 9-year-old body. The tines didn't go deep. Sam was too small, too weak, but it was enough. Garrett screamed and spun, swinging wildly. The back of his hand caught Sam across the face, sending the boy flying. But it gave Josiah the moment he needed. He lunged forward, ignoring the fire in his side, and tackled Garrett to the ground. They rolled in the bloody snow, fighting for the gun between them. Garrett was bigger, stronger, but he was wounded in 2 places now, and his strength was fading fast. Josiah's hand found the pistol grip. He wrenched it free and pressed the barrel against Garrett's chest. "This is for them," he said. "For every family you destroyed." He pulled the trigger. The sound echoed across the empty plains, flat and final. Garrett's body jerked once, then went still. Josiah rolled off him and lay in the snow, staring up at the pale morning sky. His side was on fire. His hands were shaking. But he was alive. They were all alive. "Josiah!" Maggie was running toward him, her face white with terror. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands pressing against his wound. "Don't you dare die on me," she said, her voice cracking. "Don't you dare." "Wasn't planning on it. You're bleeding everywhere." He had noticed that, actually. "This isn't funny." Didn't say it was. He tried to smile, but it came out as more of a grimace. "Sam is Sam, all right. I'm fine." The boy appeared at Maggie's side, his face already swelling where Garrett had struck him, but his eyes were clear and his voice was steady. "Did I do good, Mr. Blackwood?" Josiah reached up and gripped the boy's shoulder. "You did better than good. You saved my life. Really. Really. Couldn't have done it without you." Something shifted in Sam's expression. The wariness that had been there since the beginning, the distrust and suspicion melted away like snow in spring. "Mama," he said quietly, "we should get him inside." "I know. Help me." Between them, they got Josiah to his feet. The world swayed dangerously, black spots dancing at the edges of his vision, but he forced himself to stay conscious. One step. Another. Another. They made it to the porch before his legs gave out. "Almost there," Maggie said. "Come on, Josiah, just a little farther." "I'm trying." "Try harder." Somehow they got him inside. He collapsed onto the bed in the corner. Maggie's bed, he realized dimly, and lay there gasping while she tore open his shirt and examined the wound. "Bullet went clean through," she said, her voice tight with relief. "That's good. Less chance of infection. You sound like you've done this before." "Thomas got shot once. Bar fight in town. I patched him up then." Her hands were gentle as she pressed a clean cloth against the wound. "Hold this. I need to get supplies." "Maggie." She paused, looking down at him. "Thank you," he said, "for not staying inside. You think I was gonna let you face them alone? I hoped you would. Hoped you'd keep yourself safe." "Safe?" She laughed bitterly. "Ain't been safe since Thomas died. Probably won't ever be safe again." She brushed a strand of hair from her face. "But I'd rather be unsafe and fighting than safe and hiding. That ain't living. That's just waiting to die." He wanted to argue with her, to tell her that her life was worth more than his, that she had children who needed her. But he was too tired, and deep down, he knew she was right. Some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds were impossible. "Mama," Nell's small voice came from the loft above. "Mama, can I come down now?" "Not yet, baby. Stay up there a little longer." "But I heard the loud noises. I heard them stop. Is the bad men gone?" Maggie's jaw tightened. "Yeah, sweetheart. The bad men are gone." "Is Mr. Joe okay?" Josiah opened his mouth to answer, but Maggie cut him off with a look. "Mr. Joe is going to be just fine. Now stay up there until I tell you it's safe." There was a pause, then a small reluctant, "Okay." Maggie turned back to Josiah. "You better not make a liar out of me." "Wouldn't dream of it." She went to work on his wound, cleaning it with water she'd boiled on the stove, packing it with clean cloth, wrapping it tight with strips torn from an old sheet. Her hands were steady, her movements efficient, but he could see the tremor in her shoulders, the fear she was trying so hard to hide. "Hey," he said softly. She didn't look up. "What?" "It's over. They can't hurt you anymore." "I know." "Then why are you shaking?" Her hands stilled. For a long moment she didn't speak. "Because I almost lost you," she finally said. "Because I watched you walk out there alone and I thought—" Her voice broke. "I thought I was going to have to bury someone else I cared about." Someone she cared about. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. "Maggie, don't." She pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Don't say anything. I shouldn't have. I didn't mean—" "You meant it." She looked at him, then really looked, and her expression was raw and vulnerable and beautiful. "Yeah," she whispered. "I meant it." He reached out and took her hand. His grip was weak blood loss, and exhaustion had taken their toll, but he held on like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth. "I care about you too," he said quietly. "More than I have any right to." "Josiah, let me finish, please." He took a shaky breath. "I've been running for 6 years. Running from my past, from my grief, from everything that reminded me of what I lost. I told myself I was surviving, but I wasn't. I was just dying slowly one day at a time." She was crying now, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. "Then I stumbled onto your porch, half dead and frozen, and you let me in. You fed me. You trusted me even when you had every reason not to." He squeezed her hand. "You showed me what it meant to be alive again. I didn't do anything special. You did everything special. You and your children. You reminded me that there's still good in this world, still something worth fighting for." She was shaking her head, but he kept going. "I ain't asking for anything. I know you're still grieving Thomas. I know it's too soon. But I want you to know if you'll have me, I ain't going anywhere. Not this time." The silence stretched between them, filled with the crackle of the fire and the soft sound of her breathing. Then she leaned down and pressed her forehead against his. "You stubborn, foolish man," she whispered. "You almost got yourself killed." "Worth it. Nothing's worth dying for. You are. Those children are." He lifted his other hand, weak as it was, and touched her cheek. "A week ago I had nothing. No family, no home, no reason to keep going. Now I've got all three. That's worth everything." She pulled back just far enough to look into his eyes. "You mean that you really want to stay?" "I really want to stay. It won't be easy. The farm's in bad shape. Winter ain't over yet, and there's no guarantee those were the only men who might come for us. I know. You'll have to work, harder than anything you've done before. I know that too. And the children, Sam especially, they've been hurt before. It'll take time for them to trust you completely." "I've got time." He smiled faintly. "Reckon I've got plenty of time now." She stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of doubt or deception. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because slowly, gradually, a smile spread across her face. It was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "All right," she said softly. "All right, Josiah Blackwood. You can stay." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. You ain't seen what spring planting looks like." Despite everything, the pain in his side, the blood on his hands, the bodies lying cold in the snow outside, he laughed. It hurt, but he laughed anyway. "I look forward to it." Sam appeared in the doorway, his battered face uncertain. "Mama, is it safe for Nell to come down now?" Maggie wiped her eyes and nodded. "Yeah, baby, it's safe." The little girl descended from the loft like a small cautious bird, her rag doll clutched against her chest. She saw Josiah lying on the bed, and her face crumpled. "Mr. Joe, you're hurt." "Just a scratch, darlin'. I'll be fine." "Promise." He looked at this child, this fragile, hopeful, resilient child, and felt his heart swell. "Promise." She crossed to the bed and carefully, gently climbed up beside him. She nestled against his uninjured side, her small body warm and trusting. "I was scared," she whispered. "When the loud noises started, I thought the bad men were going to take you away." "They tried, didn't work. Because you're stronger than them." He thought about that for a moment, thought about Garrett's brutal strength, his men's weapons and numbers. By any objective measure, Josiah should have lost, but he hadn't. "No," he said quietly. "Because I had something to fight for." She considered this with her usual gravity. Was it us? Were we the something? "Yeah, sweetheart, you were the something." She smiled a real smile, bright and pure, and snuggled closer. "Good. I'm glad we're the something." Sam had moved to stand by his mother, his young face serious. He watched Josiah with those old eyes measuring and assessing. "You killed them," he said finally. "The bad men." "I did." "Does it feel bad?" Josiah thought about the question carefully. The boy deserved an honest answer. "Killing never feels good," he said. "Even when it's necessary. Even when you're protecting people you love. It leaves a mark on your soul that don't wash off." "Then why'd you do it?" "Because the alternative was worse. Because if I hadn't, they would have hurt your mama, hurt you, hurt Nell." He met the boy's gaze steadily. "Some things are worth carrying that weight for." Sam was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Pa would have liked you," he said. "He always said a man ain't measured by his strength. He's measured by what he's willing to sacrifice for others. Your pa sounds like he was a wise man." "He was." Sam's voice wavered just for a second. "I miss him." "I know you do. And that's okay. Missing the people we've lost, that's how we keep them alive." The boy blinked hard, fighting back tears. For all his fierce independence, all his desperate attempts to be grown, he was still just a child. A child who had lost his father and been forced to carry responsibilities no 9-year-old should bear. Josiah reached out with his free hand. "Come here." Sam hesitated. Then slowly he moved to the bed and let Josiah pull him into a careful embrace. The boy stood stiff at first, uncertain. But gradually, his shoulders relaxed. His head dropped against Josiah's shoulder. And then, so quietly, that only Josiah could hear, he began to cry. Not the loud, dramatic sobs of a tantrum. These were the quiet, aching tears of grief long held back, finally finding release. Josiah held him through it, one arm around Sam, the other around Nell. Both children pressed against his wounded side. It hurt God, it hurt. But he didn't let go. He'd lost his own children, lost the chance to hold them, comfort them, watch them grow. Nothing would ever fill that void. But maybe, just maybe, he could be something for these two. Not a replacement for their father. Never that. But something else, something new, something they needed as much as he needed them. Maggie watched them from the doorway, tears streaming down her face. She made no move to interfere, just stood there witnessing this moment of connection, this fragile first step toward something that might become family. When Sam finally pulled back, wiping his nose on his sleeve, his face was red, but his eyes were clearer than they'd been in days. "Sorry," he mumbled. "Didn't mean to." "Don't apologize," Josiah said firmly. "Never apologize for grieving. It's the most human thing there is." The boy nodded jerkily. Then, with the sudden mood shift that only children can manage, he straightened his shoulders and looked toward the door. "We should bury them," he said. "The bad men, before the wolves get to them." "Sam." Maggie's voice was gentle. "That can wait." "No, it can't. Pa always said you treat the dead with respect, even if they don't deserve it. It's not about them. It's about us." Josiah looked at this boy, this remarkable, resilient boy, and felt a surge of pride that wasn't his to feel, but that he felt anyway. "Your pa was right, but that's a job for when I can stand. For now, they'll keep." "The cold will preserve them," Sam agreed pragmatically. "But we shouldn't wait more than a day or two." "We won't. And we'll need to check their horses, see if they've got supplies we can use. No point wasting good equipment." "Sam." Maggie's voice was somewhere between exasperated and admiring. "Can we please have 5 minutes before you start planning logistics?" The boy looked at her with something like surprise. "But Mama, there's work to be done." "There's always work to be done. Right now, I want to sit with my family and be grateful we're all alive." Family. The word hung in the air, laden with meaning. Sam looked at Josiah, then at his mother, then back at Josiah. "Family," he repeated slowly, testing the word. "If you want," Maggie said quietly. "If you're ready." The boy was silent for a long moment. Then he moved to the bed to the space on Josiah's other side, where Nell wasn't curled up, and sat down. "I'm ready," he said. "I think." Maggie crossed to them, her movement slow and deliberate. She sat on the edge of the bed close enough to touch, but not quite touching, as if she wasn't sure she had the right. Josiah reached out and took her hand. "Come here," he said. She hesitated for just a moment. Then she leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder, her hand still clasped in his. They sat like that for a long time, the four of them huddled together on a bed too small for all of them in a cabin that creaked with every gust of wind, surrounded by the aftermath of violence and the promise of something new. Outside, the sun climbed higher in the pale winter sky. The bodies of Garrett and his men lay where they'd fallen, slowly disappearing beneath fresh fallen snow. But inside, there was warmth. Inside there was hope. Inside there was the beginning of something that felt for the first time in longer than any of them could remember like home. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of fever and pain. Josiah drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of fragments. Maggie's cool hand on his forehead, Sam's voice reading aloud from an old Bible. Nell's small fingers wrapped around his, refusing to let go even in sleep. The wound had become infected despite Maggie's careful cleaning. His body burned with fever, his mind filled with ghosts. He saw Sarah again standing in the doorway of their cabin in Colorado. She was smiling, holding Emma on her hip, and for a moment he forgot she was dead. He reached for her, called her name, but she shook her head sadly and faded like morning mist. "Don't leave," he mumbled. "Please don't leave." "I'm not leaving," Maggie's voice close and real. "I'm right here, Josiah. I'm not going anywhere." He opened his eyes. Her face swam into focus, pale and worried, dark circles under her eyes. "How long?" he croaked. 3 days. The fever broke this morning." 3 days. "You scared us half to death." Her voice cracked. "Sam's been reading to you around the clock. Says he read somewhere that voices help sick people heal. Went through half the Old Testament." Despite everything, Josiah almost smiled. "That boy's something else." "He is." She helped him sit up, propping pillows behind his back. "The wound's looking better. Infection's clearing out. You saved my life. You saved ours first. Figured it was only fair. He looked around the cabin. It was clean, orderly, the fire burning steady in the hearth. Through the window he could see bright sunlight reflecting off fresh snow. The bodies, buried. Sam and I handled it while you were out. She paused. The deputy came by yesterday. Heard the shots, I reckon. He helped finish the graves. What did he say? Said those men had been terrorizing the territory for months. Said there was a reward out for Garrett. Her lips quirked. $50. He's holding it for you at the general store. $50. Josiah let out a slow breath. That's enough to get through winter, maybe beyond. That's what I was thinking. Nell appeared at the bedside, her face lighting up when she saw his eyes open. Mr. Joe, you're awake. Hey there, sweetheart. Mama said you were fighting the sickness. She said the sickness was mean, but you were meaner. She climbed onto the bed beside him, careful of his bandaged side. Are you meaner than sickness? Apparently so. Good. I don't like sickness. It took my pa. Her voice dropped. I don't want it to take you too. Josiah put his arm around her small shoulders. It's gonna take more than a little fever to get rid of me, darling. I made a promise, remember? You promised to stay. That's right. And I always keep my promises. She nestled against him with a contented sigh. I know. That's why I like you. Sam came down from the loft, a worn Bible in his hands. His face was still bruised, yellowing now as it healed, but his eyes were bright with relief. You look better, he said. Feel better. Here you've been my personal preacher. The boy ducked his head, embarrassed. Just figured it couldn't hurt. Pa always said scripture has healing properties. Your pa was a smart man. Josiah held out his hand. Thank you, Sam, for everything. The boy hesitated only a moment before taking it. His grip was firmer than before, more certain. You'd have done the same for us. I would have. I will. Something passed between them, an understanding, an acceptance that went deeper than words. Sam nodded once, then turned to help his mother prepare breakfast. Josiah watched them move around the small cabin, this family that had somehow become his. Maggie at the stove, her hair loose around her shoulders. Sam setting the table with careful precision. Nell still curled against his side, humming softly to herself. A week ago, he'd been dying in a snowstorm, alone and forgotten. Now, he had everything he'd thought was lost forever. The days that followed were slow and gentle. Josiah's strength returned gradually each day, a little better than the last. By the end of the first week, he was sitting up on his own. By the end of the second, he was walking short distances to the window, to the table, to the door, to watch the sunset paint the snow in shades of gold and pink. Maggie watched his progress with a mixture of relief and something else, something she tried to hide but couldn't quite manage. You're pushing too hard, she said one evening, finding him at the window again. The wound needs time to heal. I'm fine. You're stubborn is what you are. Same thing, ain't it? She laughed despite herself. It was a good sound, warm and real, and he found himself wanting to hear it again. Come sit down, she said. Supper's almost ready. In a minute. She moved to stand beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Outside, the world was still and white, the last light fading from the sky. It's beautiful, she said softly. I forget sometimes how beautiful it is. Hard to see beauty when you're just trying to survive. Yeah. She was quiet for a moment. Thomas used to love evenings like this. He'd sit on the porch for hours, just watching the light change. Said it reminded him why we came out here in the first place. Why did you come out here, I mean? Same reason everyone does. Land, opportunity, the chance to build something of our own. She shook her head. Didn't quite turn out the way we planned. Plans rarely do. No, they don't. She turned to look at him. What about you? What were your plans before? He thought about it. About the young man he'd been, full of ambition and certainty. About the dreams he'd carried west, the life he'd imagined building. I was gonna be rich, he said. Strike gold, maybe, or run cattle until I had the biggest spread in Colorado. Give Sarah everything she deserved, watch Emma grow up safe and happy. What happened? Life happened, the gold never came, the cattle died, and Sarah. He stopped, his throat tight. Sarah and Emma got sick, and I wasn't there. I was 50 miles away, chasing a rumor about work while my family. He couldn't finish. Maggie reached out and took his hand. She didn't say anything, didn't try to comfort him with empty words or hollow reassurances. She just held on her grip, warm and steady. It wasn't your fault, she said finally. Wasn't it? You were trying to provide for them. That's what men do. I should have been there. Maybe. But you can't change what's done. She squeezed his fingers. All you can do is decide what comes next. He looked at her, this strong, fierce woman who had lost as much as he had and refused to break. What comes next for you? He asked. I don't know. I stopped planning a long time ago. Seemed pointless when everything kept falling apart. She paused. But lately I've been thinking maybe I could start again. Try planning, I mean. What would you plan for? Spring planting. Getting the fence fixed. Maybe adding onto the cabin if we... She stopped, color rising in her cheeks. If we what? Nothing. It was foolish. Tell me. She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. If we needed more room. For more people. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Maggie. I know it's too soon. I know you're still healing, and we barely know each other, and there's 100 reasons why this is a terrible idea. She pulled her hand back, wrapping her arms around herself. Forget I said anything. I ain't gonna forget. Josiah, please. No, listen to me. He turned to face her, fully ignoring the pull of pain in his side. I've spent 6 years running from everything that mattered. 6 years telling myself I didn't deserve to be happy, didn't deserve another chance. And maybe I don't. Maybe none of us do. She was watching him now, her eyes bright with unshed tears. But I'm tired of running, he continued. Tired of being alone. Tired of waking up every morning with nothing to live for. He reached out and cupped her face in his hands. You gave me something to live for, Maggie. You and your children. And if you'll have me, if you can see past all my broken pieces, I'd like to spend the rest of my days trying to give you something too. A tear slipped down her cheek. You already have. Then let me give you more. Let me help you rebuild this place. Let me be a father to Sam and Nell. Let me... He hesitated. Let me love you. If you'll let me. She stared at him for a long, breathless moment. Then she rose up on her toes and kissed him. It was soft and brief, barely more than a brush of lips, but it felt like a promise, like a door opening onto a future neither of them had dared to imagine. When she pulled back, she was smiling through her tears. Ask me again in the spring, she said. When you're healed, and the planting's done, and we've had time to be sure. And if I ask, then I'll say yes. He pulled her close, holding her against his chest, breathing in the scent of wood smoke and flower, and something uniquely her. Spring, then, he murmured. I can wait till spring. Promise. I promise. From across the room came a small, delighted gasp. They turned to find Nell watching from the loft ladder, her eyes wide, her rag doll clutched to her chest. Mama kissed Mr. Joe. Nell. Maggie pulled back her face, flaming. I told you to stay in bed. But I heard talking and I wanted to see. The little girl scrambled down the ladder. Does this mean Mr. Joe is going to be our new pa? Nell, it's not that simple. But you kissed him, and Auntie Ruth said when mamas kiss misters, that means they're getting married. Josiah couldn't help it. He laughed, a real laugh from deep in his belly, and even Maggie's embarrassment melted into reluctant amusement. We're not getting married right now, she said. We're just talking. That didn't look like talking. Eleanor Rose Colton, you go back to bed this instant. Nell crossed her arms, her small face stubborn. Not until somebody tells me what's happening. Josiah crouched down to her level, wincing slightly at the pull in his side. What's happening is that I care very much about your mama. And I care about you and Sam too. And I'm hoping, if it's okay with you, that I can stay here and be part of your family. The little girl considered this with characteristic gravity. Would you be our pa? If you'd like me to be. Eventually. Not right away, that takes time. But maybe someday if it feels right. Would you tell us stories like our real pa did? I could try. Might not be as good at it as he was. That's okay. Mama says practice makes perfect. Then I'll practice. Nell nodded slowly, processing this information. Then her face broke into a radiant smile. I think I'd like that, she said. Having you be our pa someday. You're nice. And you brought me a peppermint stick. That I did. And you saved us from the bad men. I had help. Your brother and your mama did most of the hard work. She threw her arms around his neck, hugging him tight. I'm glad you found us, Mr. Joe. He held her close, his eyes burning. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. The door opened, and Sam came in from outside, his arms full of firewood. He stopped short at the sight of his sister hugging Josiah, his mother standing close by with tears on her face. What happened? What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, Maggie said quickly. Everything's fine. Sam looked from her to Josiah to Nell, his expression skeptical. Then why is everyone crying? We're not crying, Nell announced, pulling back from Josiah. We're happy crying. It's different. That don't make any sense. It will when you're older. Sam set down the firewood, his eyes narrowing as he studied the adults. Did something happen while I was out? Josiah stood slowly facing the boy. Of all of them, Sam's acceptance mattered most and would be hardest to earn. The boy had lost his father. He'd taken on responsibilities no child should bear. He'd built walls around his heart to protect himself from further pain. Breaking through those walls would take time and patience. Your mama and I were talking, Josiah said carefully, about the future. What kind of future? The kind where I stay, permanently, if that's all right with you. Sam's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. You mean like a pa? Maybe, eventually, if you're okay with it. I already got a PA. I know, and nothing changes that. Your father was your father and he always will be. I ain't trying to replace him. Josiah took a breath. But I'd like to be something for you. A friend, maybe. Someone you can count on. Someone who won't leave. Everyone leaves. Not everyone. Not me. Sam's jaw tightened. You don't know that. You can't promise that. People get sick. People die. People walk away and never come back. You're right. I can't promise I'll never die. Nobody can promise that. Josiah stepped closer. But I can promise you this, I will never walk away. I will never choose to leave you or your sister or your mother. And if anything ever tries to take me from this family, it'll have to drag me kicking and screaming because I ain't going willingly. The boy's composure cracked just slightly. His lower lip trembled before he caught it between his teeth. You really mean that? On my life, Sam, I really mean it. For a long moment, no one moved. The fire crackled. The wind whistled softly outside. The whole world seemed to hold its breath. Then Sam crossed the room and wrapped his arms around Josiah's waist. Okay, he said, his voice muffled against Josiah's shirt. Okay, you can stay. Josiah held him tight, one hand on the back of the boy's head. Over Sam's shoulder, he met Maggie's eyes. She was crying openly now, not even trying to hide it. Thank you, Josiah said softly. Thank you for trusting me. Don't make me regret it, Sam mumbled. I won't. I swear I won't. The winter passed slowly as winters do. But for the first time in longer than any of them could remember, the days didn't feel endless. They felt full. Full of work and laughter and small moments of connection that wove together into something precious. Josiah grew stronger, his wound healing clean. By February, he was doing most of the heavy work around the farm, mending fences, chopping wood, tending to the animals. Sam worked beside him, learning the things his father hadn't had time to teach him, growing from a boy pretending to be a man, into something closer to the real thing. Maggie watched them from the cabin window, her heart fuller than it had been in years. She still missed Thomas, would always miss him, but the sharp edge of grief had dulled into something softer. Something that felt less like loss, and more like gratitude for the time they'd had. Nell flourished in the attention of 3 doting adults. She learned her letters from Josiah, who turned out to be a patient teacher. She learned to help in the kitchen from her mother, though her biscuits still came out lopsided. She learned to climb trees from Sam, much to Maggie's dismay. And at night, when the fire burned low and the children were asleep, Josiah and Maggie sat together at the table, talking in low voices about everything and nothing. They talked about the past, the lives they'd lived before they found each other. They talked about the present, the repairs that needed doing, the supplies that needed buying, the small triumphs and struggles of daily life. And they talked about the future. "Spring's coming," Maggie said one evening, watching the snow melt outside the window. "Another few weeks, maybe." "Noticed that?" Josiah reached across the table and took her hand. "You remember what you said about asking you something in the spring?" Her breath caught. "I remember. Been thinking about it a lot. About what I'd say, how I'd ask." He smiled softly. "Turns out, all that thinking was wasted." "Why?" "Because there ain't fancy words for what I want to say, just simple ones." He stood and moved around the table, kneeling beside her chair. "Maggie Colton, I love you. I love your children. I love this life we've been building together, and if you'll have me, I'd like to spend the rest of my days making sure you never regret letting a half-frozen stranger through your door." She was crying again, happy tears, the kind Nell had talked about. "That's a lot of days," she whispered. "A lot of regrets to avoid. I'm up for the challenge." "Are you sure? Really sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." She looked at him for a long moment. This man who had stumbled into her world, broken and lost, who had fought for her family, nearly died for them, and chosen to stay when staying was the hardest thing of all. "Yes," she said. "My answer is yes." He rose and kissed her properly this time, the way he'd wanted to for weeks. She melted into him, her arms around his neck, her heart beating against his. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "We should tell the children," she said. "In the morning, let them sleep. Sam's going to want to know the plan. He always wants to know the plan. Then we'll make one, together." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I never thought I'd have this again. After Thomas, I thought that part of my life was over. Some stories have more than one chapter. Is that what we are, a story?" He thought about it. About the journey that had brought him here, the pain and loss and wandering. About the moment he'd stumbled onto her porch more dead than alive, and she'd chosen to let him in. "Yeah," he said. "I reckon we are. And it's a good one." Spring came late that year, but it came. The snow melted, revealing muddy fields and broken fences, and 1,000 tasks that needed doing. Josiah and Sam worked from dawn to dusk, preparing the land for planting, making repairs that had been put off for too long. Maggie worked alongside them when she could, and Nell ran between them all, carrying messages and water and her endless, cheerful chatter. They were married on the first day of April in a simple ceremony at the church in Ridge Hollow. The deputy stood as witness. The old storekeeper came along with a handful of neighbors who'd emerged from their own winter isolation to celebrate the union of the widow and the stranger. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Sam clapped solemnly. Nell cheered, and Maggie kissed her new husband, with a joy that had been absent from her life for far too long. That night, after the children were asleep and the fire had burned low, Josiah and Maggie sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars emerge one by one. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "Thinking about how strange life is, how you can lose everything and find everything in the span of a single winter. Any regrets?" He looked at her, his wife, his partner, his second chance at a life worth living. "Not a one." She smiled and rested her head on his shoulder. "Me neither." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the night, the rustle of wind through new grass, the distant call of an owl, the soft breathing of children sleeping peacefully inside. "Josiah, yeah. Thank you. For not giving up. For coming back." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Couldn't have done anything else. You're what I was looking for, Maggie. I just didn't know it until I found you. And now—" He looked out at the land stretching before them, their land, their future, their home. "Now we build something worth keeping." She nodded against his shoulder. "Together. Together." The word hung in the air between them, a promise and a prayer and a beginning all at once. From inside the cabin, a small voice called out, "Mama, Pa, can I come sit with you?" Josiah smiled. "Pa." He'd never thought he'd hear that word again. Never thought he'd feel the weight of it settle around his shoulders like a mantle. But here he was. Here they all were. "Come on out, sweetheart," Maggie called back. Nell emerged, her rag doll in one hand and a blanket trailing behind her. She climbed into Josiah's lap without hesitation, curling against him like a cat. "Couldn't sleep," she murmured. "Too happy." "That's a good reason to be awake. Is this our happy ending? Like in the stories?" Josiah looked at Maggie, then back at the little girl in his arms. "No, darlin', this ain't the ending." "Then what is it?" He smiled, pulling her close, feeling his wife's warmth beside him, and his new son asleep inside, and the whole wide world spread out before them full of possibility. "This is just the beginning." And it was.